Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to show you how to install Vue Testing Library with an application set up with the Vue CLI. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting in your terminal, if you're on a Mac, or your command line, if you're on Windows machine, we're going to use the Vue CLI to create a new project. Now, if you don't have the Vue CLI downloaded, I put the link to download it in the description below. So we are going to do Vue create, and I'm just going to call this project Vue test, and I'll hit enter. Once I hit enter, it'll ask me which preset I would like to use. At the time of shooting this video, I'm going to choose Vue 2, Babel, and ESLint. I'm going to let this install all of its dependencies. Once this is installed everything, I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code so we can start editing some of the files. So I'm going to run code Vue test, and this will open up our Visual Studio Code window. In Visual Studio Code, I'm going to open my package.json, and because we're trying to install testing library, what we need to do is we actually need to install our testing library into our dev dependencies. So what we're going to do is we're going to come into our Visual Studio Code terminal, and we're going to do npm install save dev at testing library Vue, and then we need jest for our test runner as well, so I'll do jest. Enter. This is going to install the dependencies for testing library and jest. Now at this point I want to validate my installation, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new test file that sort of mimics our source directory. So since we have a hello world component, I'm going to create a new folder called tests. In that directory I'm going to create a components directory, and in that I'm going to create the hello world.spec file. Now in the spec file I'm going to paste just a standard test file, and on the first line we have import our render function from testing library. We're going to then import the hello world component, and then we have a standard describe and test statement. Now you'll notice that ESLint is throwing an error for our describe, test, and expect. That's because ESLint doesn't know we're using the jest environment. So if we go back into our package.json, into our ESLint config section, if you're using a ESLint RC, it would be there. But what we're going to do is in the environment section, we're going to add jest to be true. And when we save that, this will show ESLint that we're in the jest environment and actually resolve these functions for us. So with that, let's now add a test function or a test script so that we can actually run our jest commands. So I'm going to say test, and because I actually do not have the jest CLI installed locally, I'm going to run the utilities from the node modules folder. That's totally up to you. If you want to install jest locally, feel free, but I'm just going to do it from the node modules. And from here we can do npm run test, and this test is actually going to run jest. It's going to resolve our spec file, and let's check the output. So we're getting a syntax error here, unexpected token, and it doesn't like template. And it doesn't like template because when we're looking at the spec file, it's trying to import our Vue component, and jest doesn't know what to do with Vue components. So we need to tell it what to do, how to understand these Vue components. So to do this, we're going to set up a jest config file. And to do this, we do jest init. And this is going to prompt us with a few questions before creating our config file. Would you like to use jest when running test script in package.json? Yes. Choose your test environment. You must choose JS DOM. Do you want jest to add coverage reports? Yes. Which provider for coverage? I'm going to choose V8, and automatically clear mock calls and instances between every test? Yes. Once you finish those questions, a new file called jest.config will be created. And in this config, we're looking for two things. The first is the module file extensions. We're going to uncomment this, and we're going to add Vue to this. And then next we're looking for the transform key. And in here, what we're going to do is we're going to paste some regex, and I have this in the description below. We have a transform with some regex for a .js file and a .vue file. This is saying for any time jest runs into a JavaScript file, use babel-jest to transform it. If it ever runs into a Vue file, use vue-jest to transform it. Now we don't have vue-jest yet, but we're going to install it in just a second. But before we do, I want to show you the vue-jest GitHub. If you're using something lower than Babel 7, you will not need the Babel core bridge, but if you're using something greater than Babel 7, you will need the Babel core bridge. Now, because the Vue CLI uses Babel 7 and greater, we are going to install the Babel core bridge as well. So back in our terminal, we're going to install, again, to our dev dependencies, Babel core at bridge, and then we're going to install vue-jest. Great. Now that all the dependencies are loaded in, let's try running our tests one more time. So this will run jest, pick up our spec file, and we get another failing test, but I do expect my test to fail. The difference here is that Vue Testing Library is actually correctly rendering our component, which is good. This means that we have successfully set up Vue Testing Library. To double check, let's go into our component and just search for this string to see that this is this is part of the component itself, and it is. So we now know that in our spec file, we are actually correctly rendering our component. So I hope this video was helpful. Please let me know if you have any other questions. I think the only other things would be if you're seeing some poor output, just make sure all your files are saved and all that the configuration is set up correctly. So thanks, and I'll see you next time.